Good evening. You're watching Infowars Nightly News. I'm David Ortiz. It's Thursday, the 28th of February of 2013, and here's what we have in store for you tonight.
Tonight, a bill has been introduced in Texas that would allow children to consent to receiving vaccines without any parental input. Then, documents reveal that U.S. Marshals are using spy drones. Sarah Palin says the feds are stockpiling bullets for civil unrest. Yeah, you think? All that and more on the Infowars Nightly News.
Welcome back. Well, it seems the state of Texas is sponsoring legislation, a certain legislator in Texas, that would allow certain minors to receive immunization shots if they want to. According to an article posted today by our very own Melissa Melton on Infowars.com, the headline reads, "Breaking, Texas moves to forcibly inoculate children. A bill has been introduced in Texas that would allow children to consent to receiving vaccines without any parental input." The bill, SB 63, which is sponsored by Representative Jane Nelson, reach out to her, is called Relating to Consent to the Immunization of Certain Children, would allow for consent to immunization by a child if the child is pregnant or is the custodial parent of a child. So basically, what this proposed bill is saying is that we think you're mature enough to, get an immunization shot if, in fact, you're pregnant. So it's clearly amazing. I don't know what the intent of this is. I guess it's probably just to get the, big pharma more rich. But that's what they want, and that's what's going on in the state of Texas. Reach out to Jane Nelson, and it's important to note that according to various studies, parents who receive flu shots, mothers who receive flu shots, are 4,000% more likely to experience a fetal death. So there you go. Jane Nelson, SB 63. Now, in other stories, in Infowars.com, an article was posted today. The headline read, "Documents reveal U.S. Marshals using spy drones." Shocking. Documents obtained by the ACLU have revealed that the U.S. Marshals Service has experimented with using drones for domestic surveillance. The documents available on the ACLU website were released via a Freedom of Information Act request. That's an evil act. And basically, from the very few documents that they received, one of the documents said in 2004 and 2005, the U.S. Marshals Service tested 2 small drones in remote areas to help them track fugitives. And the Marshals Service abandoned the program after both drones crashed. So it really doesn't matter what federal agency fesses up to this. Basically, all federal agencies that are involved with the military are using this, but we're starting to see now that more and more agencies are fessing up to this due to Freedom of Information Act. So there you go. They're using domestic drones domestically here in the U.S., and that's just further proof of it. Now, in other news, speaking of civil liberties being violated, in an article posted today on Infowars.com by our very own Kurt Nimmo, the headline reads, "It's official. The Fourth Amendment is dead." And basically, the article says that earlier this week, in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that citizens cannot challenge government wiretapping laws, in particular the unconstitutional Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, and more recently the FISA Amendments Act of 2008. And later on in the article, it quotes Judge Andrew Napolitano, former Judge Andrew Napolitano, who's a libertarian. He says, quote, "FISA gives the government unchecked authority to snoop on all Americans who communicate with any foreign person in direct contravention of the Fourth Amendment." Basically, FISA basically says that if you're speaking to someone overseas and the government deems that person a threat or a person of interest, they can basically wiretap you and surveillance what you're doing. So that's also dangerous not only for you and me, but for journalists. If journalists are trying to speak to a source who's overseas and the government says, "Hey, what are you doing?" We won't be able to out criminality because sources we're not going to be able to speak to certain sources. Now, in other news, in an article posted today by Paul Joseph Watson, the headline reads, "Sarah Palin says feds are stockpiling bullets for civil unrest. She sounds like a conspiracy theorist. You've got even neocons fessing up to what Infowars has made the public aware of. And former governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin, has warned that the federal government is stockpiling bullets in preparation for civil unrest, adding that America is finished if it cannot deal with its debt problems. She wrote that on her Facebook page. And, you know, now you have neocons from Mark Levin, Michael Savage, now Sarah Palin, admitting that the federal government is arming itself to the teeth. And the only people who don't know about that now, or who act like they don't know this is going on, is the federal government. Whenever you've got warmongering neocons acknowledging that the government is stockpiling, you know the government is stockpiling. And what's amazing here is that Infowars is breaking this story. You're always hearing that Infowars is irrelevant, the alternative media is irrelevant, yet we're responsible for the discussion that is taking place in politics today. Paul Joseph Watson broke this story along with Alex Jones. And again, now you've got neocon Sarah Palin talking about this. For more on this issue, we go to our very own David Knight. So, David Knight, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on this issue.
Well, the media has gone into full damage control with this after Sarah Palin came out with it. You've got Politico, you've got Atlantic Wire, you've got Huffington Post. You've got everybody basically saying these are debunked conspiracy theories. And they're not debunked. We're not making this up. As a matter of fact, it was Politico that even linked Sarah Palin to Alex Jones, you know, and so she joins Alex Jones and Infowars and looking at this. I've got a graph here that basically shows how in the last 10 months the DHS has ramped this up. And Watson pulled these figures from FedBiz and from a couple of different sites here that are FedBid and Federal Business Opportunities. This one right here is actually a publication of the GSA. This is the main source for contractors to get information about what the federal government is buying. So this is public information. This is coming from the Fed's site. So there's no dispute that they're putting out bids to get these things. The question is, why are they buying so much ammunition? Well, the media has tried to explain that away with a couple of attempts. First, they came back and they said, well, last summer they said they started talking about the smallest purchases. They talked about 174,000 from Social Security Administration. They talked about 46,000 from the Weather Service, from NOAA. And they tried to explain it away and say, this is just for practice. This is for target practice. But we're not talking about a few 100,000. We're talking about hundreds of millions of purchases. And when the very first one of these came out at 200 million, people were saying, why are they buying so much ammunition? But they quickly doubled down on that and bought 450 more million just a couple of months after that. And then a couple of months after that, they got another 750 million. Then another month after that, they got another 200 million. I mean, they're just ramping up on this.
Tell us about war. Like, if these bullets were all, first of all, talk about hollow points very quickly.
Right.
And talk about war. How, let's just say this was all used for war. How long would that be for?
Good point. You know, when they're talking about it being for target practice and they're talking about saving money, hollow points are very expensive. You don't use those for target practice. So it's ludicrous from that standpoint. If you know anything about firearms, you know that they're not going to buy hollow points for firearms practice. But if you look back at the amount of ammunition that was being used at the peak of the Iraq War, that was 5.5 million rounds a month, okay? So you're still looking at the quantities that they bought. That would be about 24 to 30 years worth of ammunition if they're fighting a war the size of the Iraq War. I think they want to basically starve the marketplace of ammunition. Because if you've got guns and no ammunition, it's like having a car with no gas. Okay, it's pretty. And one thing that they can do is they can essentially suck all the oxygen out of the marketplace, suck all the ammunition out of the marketplace with these gigantic purchases. But we found out just a couple of months ago, people going through and looking at the recycling documents coming out of Fort Drum in New York, found that they are not selling their once-used brass, but they're spending extra money to turn it into brass scrap and selling it to the Chinese as scrap metal instead of selling it back into the United States market as once-used brass, which would help to keep the price of ammunition down.
All right, David, thank you so much for that analysis.
Thank you, David.
Now, in other news, Rasmussen released a poll today that showed that 40% say internet is the best way to get news. 37% say TV. Now, some of that is obviously going to be for convenience, why people like getting their news from the internet, because they don't have to wait for commercials or for 6 or 7 o'clock. But a lot of that is also the credibility of alternative news sites such as Infowars. Again, we talked about Sarah Palin. She's made aware of the stockpiling, because of Infowars breaking that story. Now, in other news, in an article posted today on Infowars.com by Paul Joseph Watson, the headline reads, Tech Guru warns of internet disaster. Scientist Danny Hillis calls for Internet Plan B in times of emergency. Inventor and scientist Danny Hillis warns that the internet has expanded it way beyond its limits and is set for a disaster, calling for an Internet Plan B that would operate in times of emergency. And he basically cited the Stuxnet virus that happened earlier this year. We all know that that virus was a false flag attack, and the reason why scientists and members of the government are saying that we need a plan B and we need to regulate the internet is because they obviously want to regulate the internet. They want to control who gets to use the internet, and later on in the article it says Internet ID cards could be issued or licenses would be issued to individuals who have proven themselves to be well-behaved citizens. Those have not used the web for illegal downloads, hacking, or, God forbid, criticizing officialdom. That's where we're headed, where you're going to need an internet license to use the internet, and this is all part of a false flag attack so that the government could ultimately regulate the internet. Now, in our last news story, according to the Los Angeles Times, he's now Secretary of State, John Kerry pledges $60 million in aid to Syrian opposition forces. And the article says Secretary of State John Kerry pledged an additional $60 million in aid to Syrian opposition forces, including food and medical support directly to armed rebels for the first time, but turning aside their demand for weapons. And later on, the article says, this is a quote from the Secretary, "We express our commitment to helping the Syrian people in order to achieve their goal to live in a free and a safe and a just society. Their goal is our goal." So there you go. This has blowback written all over it. We shouldn't be involved in this situation. In my estimation, people in the Middle East don't appreciate our meddling in their affairs. Again, this looks like blowback, and many of those individuals are Al-Qaeda members. I thought we were at war with those individuals. Many of the individuals who they're helping. Now, we're going to go to our daily quote, and it comes from Mr. Muhammad Gandhi, and it reads, "Providence has its appointed hour for everything. We cannot command results, we can only strive." Mahatma Gandhi. And in just a minute, we will be back with Reverend Childress from blackgenocide.org. We're going to talk about the 40th anniversary of that diabolical ruling, Roe versus Wade.
ProPure is introducing Pro One. All of your filtration in one system, portable, on the go. This is the Pro One by ProPure. You wanted it, you got it. No more do you have 2 or 3 filters to just reduce sodium fluoride. You have a system that cuts out the sodium fluoride and up to 95% of hydrofluorosilicic acid. Advanced manufacturing technology combines silver-impregnated white ceramic with new Aquamedics advanced media for removal of fluoride and other heavy metals, all in one filter element. It cuts out the acid derivative of fluoride. It is the only one that does it, and out of the gates, we have it discounted at 10% off with promo code WATER. This is the only system that in one unit helps reduce or remove pesticides, herbicides, chloramines, ammonia, and chlorine, hydrofluorosilicic acid, the most common form of fluoride not covered by other fluoride filter brands, and sodium hexafluorosilicate. This is a revolution against the tyrants. They love putting the toxic acid base of fluoride into your water. They love the fact that it's an adjuvant supercharging the trace Prozac in the water and the hormones and the other chemicals. By cutting out fluoride, you cut out the turbocharger in all the poison being artificially introduced into your body. This is what I use. It's a win-win. You get a high-quality product at the lowest price. You support the InfoWar. Get your Pro Pure with the new Pro One filter today at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling 888-253-3139.
Infowars.com is proud to introduce the new Infowars skateboards by Alien Workshop. Skaters have always been against the grain socially. Now wake up your friends politically. Just go to InfoWarsStore.com. We have divide and conquer our brainwashing. Then take your deck to your local skate shop, pick out your own trucks, your own wheels, and then hit the streets and wake some people up. Here is legendary skateboarder Jake Nunn.
This one has a lot more concave than I have on my board, and I like concave. It makes it easier to turn and feel the board. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's almost the same shape as mine. It's not really a sport, and it's not really art. It's just kind of freedom, you know? I've listened to Alex Jones for a long time, and I love what Infowars does. I've always loved Alien Workshop, too. I think it's kind of cool you guys got together. This one's pretty nice. Definitely one for the wall, one for the collection. Also good to skate.
Get these limited edition decks at InfoWarsStore.com.
This is Jake Nunn. Get these beautiful new skateboards at Infowars.com. Alien Workshop collaboration. Good stuff.
Welcome back. We are now joined by Reverend Childress of blackgenocide.org. We're going to talk about a lot of hard-hitting issues affecting the black community as well as Americans of all ethnicities. Welcome to our show. Thank you for joining us on InfoWars Nightly News.
Oh, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Now, Pastor, I'm sure you're well aware 2013 marks the 40th anniversary of that diabolical ruling, Roe v. Wade. Sadly, polls show that most Americans, it's about 54% to 44%, are still pro-choice, most Americans, although about 70% would like some restrictions. Tell us a little bit about the fact that it's the 40th anniversary and sadly, most Americans still support, are still pro-choice.
Well, yeah, it all depends. Some people even say George Bush was really pro-choice because of that 0.5%. It all depends how the poll is questioned. Unquestionably, that 70% that wants restrictions undoubtedly is also part of that number that still feels rape and incest means that indeed it should be pro-choice. And I'd like to see that polling because we're finding that many people unquestionably feel abortion as it stands right now should unquestionably be rewritten. The law should be revisited. And whether or not right now we could get rape or incest as those children protected is quite unlikely. But nevertheless, I believe the shift is definitely heading towards the pro-life position.
Okay, so you're saying that most people identify themselves as pro-choice because of the rape and incest?
Absolutely. And you have to watch these folks that do the polling. We often have entities that are trying to get their philosophy across, therefore make it appear that their side is winning or this is the view of most Americans. But unquestionably, you see the crowds are growing every year at pro-life rallies. Legislation is passing more so now than ever before. And unquestionably, the data shows undoubtedly that we are correct, that life does begin at conception. And if that is the case, the Declaration of Independence lets us to know that life should be protected undoubtedly by a constitutional right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we're winning, but you would never know it by the mainstream media. But undoubtedly, I'm finding young people, especially in groves, are coming to the pro-life position.
And we were just talking just a couple minutes ago how Jane Roe, I believe her name is Norma McCorvey, I believe. We don't know, but she's actually a pro-life advocate. She actually is very bothered by the fact that her ruling has led to so many abortions. But that's just important to know. Norma McCorvey, she was identified as Roe. She's a pro-lifer now. But let's talk a little bit about abortion. In my opinion, Reverend, I don't know how any Christian votes for either party. That's just my opinion, because one party loves warfare. They love dropping bombs on people, but they love themselves some Jesus. And then you've got the other party who supports abortion, or they're abortion enablers, and they say hallelujah on Sunday. So what do you say to those people who continue to vote for the abortion party, which is the Democratic Party? We know that Republicans love warfare. They're bad. But what would you say to people who say that they're pro-life and they're Christians, but they support the Democratic Party?
Well, undoubtedly, the Democratic Party's platform, even, I was shocked when God was voted out of the platform. I was shocked when they attempted to say that Jerusalem was not the capital of Israel. The Democratic Party let their true philosophies and ideologies be revealed. Now, granted, due to polling, they snatched that back, but the fact that it even came to the floor and it was voted upon, and if you remember correctly, when they tried to take it out of the platform, meaning put it back in, in the platform, the quorum present booed. And so I think any Christian that has any type of relationship with Jesus Christ really needs to evaluate themselves very strongly when they say they are supporting the Democrat Party, even though independents are growing by leaps and bounds also. But it is the antithesis of the consciousness of God to take life indiscriminately, especially innocent life, and to endorse legislation that does so makes me really wonder about your own personal relationship with God. So this is something that has been a pain and a thorn in my side for quite some time, but we are making some ground. And in the African-American community, it is always simply because the Republicans have been so demonized, they feel that they're picking the lesser of two evils. And so what we have to understand is that, just as Dr. King said, we can no longer judge a man by the color of his skin, but by the content of character, and that our values ought to be taken into the voting booth no matter who or what the candidate party is. It's their values that we should be pulling the lever on. And until the Christians begin to do that, this culture will continue in its spiral spin down the immoral abyss.
And what would you say to those that say, but Pastor, it's going to be, I don't like the conservatism, and so it's the lesser of two evils, so that's why I vote for the Democratic Party. I say, sit a couple of elections out. If you're a Democrat, they'll get if you sit out 2 or 3 election cycles, they'll get the point and they'll change their stance on abortion. What would you say to those that say, but I just can't pull the lever for the Republican Party? What would you say?
Well, I agree with that somewhat. There's so many that have died, especially the African-American community, for them to have that right to vote. But if it means supporting a culture of death and legislation that is eliminating almost a third of African-Americans as it stands at this day, and that is killing just under 4,000 babies, 1,786 of those babies are African-American. I think if that is the case, that you cannot pull the lever on a Republican, and you certainly should not pull the lever on a Democrat if you're a Christian.
Now, tell us a little bit about your organization, blackgenocide.org.
Well, it is not hyperbole. It is not a right-wing rant. It is a sociological fact. And the fact of the matter is that abortion has accelerated the demise of the African-American community simply due to the fact that we are well beneath the replacement level. 52% of all African-American pregnancies end in abortion. In New York, 60% of all African-American pregnancies end in abortion. And so you have major cities where there's more abortions than there is live births amongst African Americans, and that has brought down the you need 2.2 to replace the existing population, and right now we're at 1.96. And so this is something unquestionably that abortion has been the guillotine that has expedited this genocide, and it is systemic. And it's something unquestionably in the African-American community, especially, you have the shepherds leading the sheep to the slaughter because they are profiting from the the abortion industry. I often say if abortion was not lucrative, it would not be legal. So we are in a fight. We're not winning the ground I would like to win each day, but we are taking ground. And this has been a very special year so far. And I really believe, despite the re-election of the most pro-abort president in our nation's history, I truly believe there's going to be ground gained this year on the abortion issue, simply because I see very different factions of our society and community coming together and learning for the first time of the decimation of the African-American community and people of color in general by the abortion industry and how they're being targeted. Even Muslims, imams, are on the phone with me. There's secular people who don't believe in the Christ that I embrace, but want to do something about the genocide that's going on in the community. And so this is something I've never seen before. But remember, after 40, there's always a shift. And we've been wandering in the wilderness of abortion for 40 years now. And I believe, despite Pharaoh still sitting on the throne, that there's going to be a great awakening this year in the African-American community on the abortion issue. And it's also, this 40th year is also a Jubilee year for African-Americans. Every 50 years, there's a Jubilee. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln was declared the slaves to be free. And so that's since then, this is the second 50, or is it the third 50? Yeah, the third 50 from there. And it's also 50 years from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, which I believe is also significant because in a Jubilee year, the chains of slavery are broken and the captives are set free by law. And so Martin questioned America about not allowing the nation to live out its creed. And we have yet to live that creed out. And there's always been some segment of our community legally, legislatively, that has been oppressed simply because of either the color of their skin or their position in life. And since 1967 in Colorado, and then, of course, nationally, 1973, the segment of our community that has been denied their civil rights is the unborn. And so I believe we're going to make leaps and bounds this year because of, one, in the African-American community, it's a Jubilee year. The Emancipation Proclamation was declared 150 years ago. This is a Jubilee. I think there's going to be, this is 40 years since Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, Speaking of victories, so we've got 3 minutes left. I want to talk to you about two things, but I just found out that Arkansas, they've passed a bill, or they're on the verge of passing a bill that would make abortion illegal after 5 months. So that's good. They're now the 7th state in the union. North Dakota seems like they're going to pass a bill that's going to go to a referendum. So there have been, speaking of Jubilee, victories, and it seems that it's growing. That's good. And it's important to note that you've produced a documentary called MAFA 21 that talks about black genocide, and you can get that on InfoWarsShop.com. Again, MAFA 21. It's a hard-hitting documentary. You can get that on InfoWarsShop.com. In the 3 minutes we have left, I want to talk about two things. One is Trayvon Martin. This marks the 1-year anniversary, speaking of black genocide. But 90-second responses on both. One of the reasons why people say they support abortion is because, you know, they don't like it, but these kids will have to go up for adoption, you know, if they're born. And there's nobody that's going to want these children. They're going to be born with one parent or in an orphanage. You know, your take on that argument.
Well, bottom line, let's go bottom line, then I'll give you my take. Bottom line, no one has the right to cut off a life because they don't believe you're going to be happy. You always have to give that person the right to pursue happiness. Meaning, if I'm pursuing happiness, I may be born in an unhappy situation, but don't cut off my right to pursue it. I have the right to pursue life, liberty, and pursue and happiness now. But of course, much of those claims are untrue. There's always people who are willing. The church is beginning to step up adoption, especially even in the Black community, more so now than ever before. I cannot assure that every child that would be born or orphaned would have the proper home, of course, but I can say this, that I know of many. I know people who were scheduled for rape, scheduled for abortion due to rape, and that mother chose not to, and is making tremendous contributions. And people don't know, Michelangelo was a product of rape and incest. Louis Armstrong was a product of rape and incest. Ethel Waters was a product of rape and incest. These are people who were born in unhappy situations, but given the right to pursue happiness, made great contributions to society. That's, well, with those powerful examples, we have to go. But again, Pastor Clenard Childress Jr., blackgenocide.org. Watch his documentary, Mafia 21. That's on InfoWarsShop.com. Pastor, we definitely want to have you again in the future. You are a true patriot. Thank you for your work. Thank you. Mississippi shall be an oasis of truth. God bless you. God bless. Well, that's all for this edition of InfoWars Nightly News. Remember, if you want to continue supporting our operation, become a member of PrisonPlanet.tv. For less than $6 a month, you can get access to a lot of great content, and you can share your username and password with up to 10 people. Well, that's all for this edition of InfoWars Nightly News. We'll see you again tomorrow evening.